All right, it's 6 p.m. IST now. We are geared up for the session, and happy to see you all. Hi, folks. Very good evening. This is Shrija, community manager working at DC Cap. Um, I know, first of all, thank you so much for registering to the Quality in Touch virtual series by the QA Touch product community. And I'm very excited as you are. So QA Touch has been actively organizing QA meetups and webinars across the globe for more than 2 years. However, during this unprecedented lockdown times that has affected at least a quarter of the world's population, so we are looking for some means to organize the meetups. Our idea is to invite QA experts across the community and ask them to share their insights and invaluable expertise with our QA Touch community as well, QA fraternity across the industry through our virtual meetup. So here we are, the Quality in Touch virtual series, a monthly event trailer-made for QA community as such. And this is our very first webinar in this series, and we are very excited towards it. And all that said, I don't want to hold off you guys from hearing about the captivative sessions by the wonderful speakers for this day lined up. I'm sure that you will have a great learning for this day. And we have a Swati Shri, head of customers QA Touch product, and she will give a small introduction about the speaker and the product as such. Over to you, Swati Shri. Thank you, guys.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining the webinar. I'm Swati Shri from QA Touch. QA Touch is one of the leading software management tools that helps QA community to manage the test management activities. Launched in 2017, QA Touch has over 1,000 plus active customers today. We have leveraged the product to make the test management process easier. We provide array of good features like inbuilt mind map, inbuilt bug tracker, multi-language support, and AI text prediction. Moreover, we have integration with third-party tools like Jira, Jira Server, GitHub, GitLab, Trello, Bitbucket, Assembler, Bugzilla, UTrack, and Redmine. We are lined up with two amazing speakers for the day today. Our first session is going to be about how does BDD testing helps to grow your career by Faisal Humayun. Faisal Humayun, senior system test lead at Ubicquia. He has over 15 years of experience in quality assurance. Now, Faisal is going to give a session on how does BDD testing helps to grow your career. Over to you, Faisal.
Hi, everybody. Let me just see if I can get my screen sharing going. And just confirm for me if you can see my screen share.
Yes, Faisal, we can.
All right, awesome. So this is a really challenging topic, but I want to just thank the distinguished panel. I want to thank Shrija. I want to thank Swati. I want to thank Bhavni and my buddy Jason. He's going to be giving a fantastic follow-up presentation on automation testing. It's huge because I'm just going to lead in on what BDD is, and then it'll really make a lot of sense in terms of automation. So I want to get started. Thank you also for the quick introduction. Half of that time that the 15 years I spent in the field stabbing away at QA, I've been also working on high technology types of environments such as IoT and data mining. So it's been a really exciting journey, and I'm really grateful for a lot of the mentors and teachers I've had, and they've been able to just prop me up and help me build out a proper harness for my ideas and help me posture my right attitude. So that's really helped me a lot. And BDD testing in the mid-2000s was something that was introduced to me after Dan North founded it, and it was just something that was interesting and at the same time exciting, and I was able to really bring it to bear and make a lot of difference to my career and also the folks that I mentored. So I think it was definitely worth sharing and talking about, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So, well, once again, this is me. You can reach me at my LinkedIn, which is, you might want to notice it, it's down there. And I'll be using a tablet, right? So I'll talk about, that's my LinkedIn address right there. You can also email me. these are my core competencies that I was able to build out. They're going to be crucial to talk about because you can't talk about BDD without core competencies. And so that's something I will be mentioning as we go along, because the real star is not BDD, the real star is you. And so that's something we want to talk about. And let's go ahead and move on to the more important and juicy stuff. So bear with me a second and let's get that going. Let's talk about, really briefly, but it's really important, the qualities of a software tester. Talking about BDD makes a lot of sense, but only after we talk about you, the tester. So it's kind of important to understand that you have some of these crucial qualities. And most paramount you will find as we talk about BDD is things like empathy, team spirit, business sense, right? These are going to be core and crucial, on top of having all those individual, sort of wins, right? The willingness to learn, analytical mindset, inquisitiveness, being technical, being adaptable is kind of big too, and competency. What we've seen is how people judge you is based mostly on your attitude, right? Companies can say, you know what, we'll give you time to learn, right? And maybe you got a good head on your shoulders and you can become technical. So the bigger challenge has always been finding the right fit, right? Whether you're a tester, and then also to sustain or make any advancement in your career, like you've got to do well on the soft skills. So those three in particular are kind of crucial, and I just wanted to make mention of those before we move on. So let's do that. Now, about BDD, from my recollections, it's behavioral driven development. I personally would have preferred if we called it behavioral driven testing. In the same way, I prefer to say STLC, for software test lifecycle, as opposed to software development lifecycle. That's just a little bias from a tester's perspective. But yeah, it's that ship has sailed, and it's basically known to the industry as BDD, and it has its roots in test-driven development, and I could see why that was important for them to go from that perspective, because Kent Beck had come up with the idea of TDD after rediscovering it from the 60s, from an old prototype, and then eventually, it was very developer centric. It was very code centric. So Dan North later on in 2000s wanted to leverage the ideas for automation and the ideas that TDD espoused in principles, and he wanted to make it more business focused, right? Customer focused. And that's kind of a big deal, especially for us testers. One of the things we've always struggled with, regardless of the methodology that's out there, is this age-old example. This little meme joke that goes around, right? This is the scenario where a customer is out there and they're wanting basically a swing set that looks like that. But as there's all these different silos in the company, you could see how there's reinterpretation or lost in translation. Here's a funny one about no documentation. But ultimately, the customer ends up with this, and that's exactly the type of thing we're trying to avoid, right? Whether it's verification or validation, are we building the right product, and then did we build it right? Those are the core principles of testing that we always need to be watchful of, and so BDD really helps with that, right? So I want to be able to go back and talk about how that gets done. One thing I'll make mention is it leverages what's called a domain specific language called Gherkin DSL, right? And what that looks like is something like this. Given a context or preconditions, when a certain set of actions occur, then a certain outcome is achieved. And it could be as simple as this. Given I'm an instructor and I'm viewing a student submission in a course, when I enter a valid grade, then the grade is reflected in the gradebook. Now that sounds so simple, but surprisingly, you'll find that there's a lot of problems out there in the field and organizations when they're trying to communicate simple ideas, right? They're either overcomplicated or it's grossly underinformed. And so this the simplicity of this language is what is just amazing about BDD. So this is a cornerstone, the given, when, and then, right? There's ands and buts, but that's what I want to get you guys started on, is understanding a little briefly a little bit about what that's all about. All right, so let's move on. I want to talk about what does BDD look like. All right, on the screen, you'll probably see, you know, there's some imagery from our QA Touch, DC Cap's flagship product for QA's test management tool. And so it is something that, you know, test management tools out there are acknowledging that in addition to the traditional way of test writing, BDD has gained a lot of ground and a lot of traction. And so they're making adjustments for it in their product. And so definitely, guys, check out QA Touch. They've got great support for BDD. Moving on, what would BDD look like when you're in a more traditional sort of JIRA sort of setup, right? On the screen now, you're going to see an animation going on about what that sort of looks like. You got your features, you got your scenarios. Look at, there's your given, when, and then. You can interact with, you know, the status of that scenario, whether it's a pass or fail, whether it's the type of thing that's automated or not. So a lot of visibility, guys. This is something managers absolutely love. So this is the type of traceability, accountability, and visibility that's just front and center, and what makes human readable and really adored across the board in an organization. So that is what I would say BDD would look like if it's being implemented within your company. Here's another screen that shows the automation aspect of it. Jason's going to be giving a talk about QA automation, but I wanted to go ahead and at least drop a screen here, and just that sort of gives you a sense of what step definitions, the given, when, and then, how it would look like if you're coding for it. And the notion would be that all this code is going back and it's validating those statements as being true or pass or fail, right? So you would load this up on the wire on your CI/CD server and be able to get those results going. Here's another screen of what it would look like when you actually execute. Previously, the screen was all about coding. This particular screen is all about what the output would look like on the console. So you could see how there's test scenarios that are being executed. If there's any passes or fails, it can certainly show you that. So this is, those are the scenarios being executed, pass or fail, and they can relate right back to your story. If you have a hook back into JIRA or whatever your test management tool is, you can certainly do that. All right, and so moving on, the next part would be reporting. So I would say one of the fundamental things about, one of the great things about BDD is how human readable the reporting is. Now, this particular reporting tool is called Serenity BDD, but there's other ones, Allure, you have Extent, and they all have support for BDD-based report sets, result sets. So this is just one. I just wanted to show you how, when this is automatically generated by your test automation, the results are punched out as a result that's HTML, and it's viewable. It's easy to look at, it's easy to read, and there's non-technical stakeholders as well as technical stakeholders who can look at these reports and say, hey, you know, this makes a lot of sense. It gives us confidence in where a product is and where it's headed. So definitely that's a good one. Now, going back to what I would say is the career aspect of BDD. I want to take a few moments here and talk about this real quick. So one of the things I began to realize is we often operate, when we're testers or we're coming into testing, we operate in what's called the I shape, right? And so we'll come in doing a lot of manual testing, learning the ropes, and then we'll sort of figure out a discipline of maybe learning to do QA automation, and we'll become specialists in here, right? But what a lot of HR and a lot of companies begin to value much more is the ability to pop out of your silo, right? So come out of your silo right here, because that's what a silo looks like. You're kind of right down in there in the middle, and then become a little bit of a generalist, right? And so you have to be able to understand what's going on outside of your space. All right. Now, what does that look like? I think in any company, you have what's called a front office, right? And you have a back office. And who do you usually find in the front office? You'll probably have sales. You'll probably have account managers. You know, you'll probably have business analysts, maybe product managers. You'll probably have all these guys out here. Maybe you'll have UX designers out here, and they're the first frontline interface for what's happening with customers, right? So with the customers that are out there, these guys are interfacing with them, and then the front line right there. Then you have, this is sort of like the middle line, and then the back office has the product owner, your usual agile team, the three amigos. You've got your developers, you've got your testers, you've got maybe DevOps, right? You've also got customer service reps, maybe you've got field operations or just operations, and they would represent the back office, right? So there's a lot going on in the organization outside of our silo. And so there's this notion of becoming a T-shaped professional, which requires you to go up and start interfacing with these folks, right? BDD lets you do that in such a great way because it's human readable language. And remember, at the top of this presentation, I talked about all your empathy skills or your ability to work with teams. You're coming across in a non-hostile, in a very friendly way. You're talking to them about, hey, I understand that, you know, we want to try to accomplish these goals. How do we go about doing that? And you kind of like begin a dialogue with them. So that allows you to do what has been known as shift left, right? So those are terms that are popularized now. There's shift left testing, right? Where you're getting earlier and earlier with how the stories are coming in, and then you have the shift right or right testing. Personally, though, I like to call it shift anywhere because I don't want to say that developing your career as becoming an automation specialist, as an example, or staying within your silo is a non-factor. It certainly is. So I like to use the term shift anywhere, and you could just shift anywhere you want. And I think that is what really helps you gain ground, develop the sort of credibility to work in various groups in a manner that builds up trust, right, and confidence. And then that is really what the assurance and quality assurance is all about. So yeah, with that said, you can see there's other shapes. There's a pie shape and the cone shape. And the notion here is that you start working with, for example, a UX expert, and maybe there's a bandwidth issue, right? And maybe you hop out of your silo and you're helping them with, you've got your gherkin that got you through. You want to help create traceability. You want to give them feedback. Slowly you're understanding how their tool works. And suddenly you become versed in how the UX developer works with their tools. Maybe there's a NetSuite developer, right? And you're working with NetSuite. And so slowly you're becoming more of a comb-shaped specialist. So you understand how all these different silos are working, right? And you're not just stuck in your own silo, but how do you get out of your silo and how do you negotiate coming into other silos? BDD really helps you do that. All right. Couple that with the fact with your soft skills where you're empathetic and you're making sure that you have a willingness to be working a team in a non-hostile way. They'll allow you the visa to get back in there and really work with them. And so that is how you would advance your career, so to speak. And I hope that makes sense. And that's really the essence of what I wanted to sort of bring about is a simple syntax, a simple language syntax allows you to get up off your seat and go and talk to other folks and see what it's like to help them with their bandwidth issues and be empathetic to, you know, how in what way you can help create the traceability from what it is they do to what it is that will be going out the door, right? And so you can really have that ability to go and communicate and get folks to really work with you, and then you become invaluable. You become an invaluable resource to a company, and it helps you sustain, if not propel you in your career path. It's worked for me. It's worked for a lot of guys, and that's in summation of how BDD can help you advance your career. I'll be happy to take a lot of questions, any questions, and I'm gonna see if I could turn this back. Um, Let me know, guys, if you do have any questions. Be happy to take those.
Okay, guys, like if you have any questions, you can use your Q&A tab in the at the lower end. Um,
I got to make sure I find it. I've got to find that tab. Okay, I found it. If I went too fast, or if you guys want me to revisit any topic in particular, let me know. Be happy to do that as well. On my screen, I pulled up an impact map. If Shrija, let me know on
yeah,
time, but I'll
I
just.
mean, we got a question from Scott Roberts. So, is BDD key to find a position? Do companies look for BDD skills?
I think you'll notice that it makes a big difference when it is there as opposed to when it's not there. Try it. Learn it. See if you can wrap your head around it, and then integrate it in your resume, or if you're already in an job opportunity, see if you can start brushing it, depending on what your position is, right? If you have a QA lead or a QA manager, start running the ideas by them. If you yourself are a QA manager, start applying the principles of BDD. And I think that it'll become self-evident that, for me, emphatically, it is yes. From the perspective that I think it's pivotal. It's pivotal for how a company can make sure that the voice of the customer is not lost, right? So that's the big thing with BDD. And being able to, on my screen right now, you can see I have an impact map that our UX folks would make. So you have the business goals, and they would identify the personas and how they want the impact of the stories, and then ultimately there's a deliverable. So what BDD would help you do is it would help you forge the narration, right? So with the given, when, then, you can really cross these, make a bridge, and make sure that everything traces back to the business goal. Identify the role of the actor, what impacts you're looking for, what the deliverables are. That's the magic of BDD. It actually lets you integrate with other workflows happening inside your organization, whereas otherwise you would not. I don't think there's a lot of folks who are interested in, test plans, test cycles. That really is not something they're interested in. They're interested in what it is they do, and in how you can come in and actually help them feel reassured that when they throw the ball over the net and it comes into the back office from the front office, that what goes out the back door is what they promised the customer. So yes, I would say this is something you should most certainly put to the test. Any other questions? I hope that I've answered that one.
Yeah, we have a question from Shivaranjani. Good session overall. Which tool you would prefer to build the BDD? Why?
So to me, as you've probably seen, I'm very agnostic to, specific tools. There's different coders out there, different preferences. There's some Python, there's some folks who like to work in Python. There's other folks who like to work in JavaScript, yet there's others who don't want to get away from Java. So, the great thing about the Cucumber project that has led a lot of the initiatives in BDD is they've created adapters and test harnesses and wrappers, which pretty much plug in to your preference of languages for the automation side of it. Other than that, the Gherkin DSL is agnostic. You don't need to be stuck in a particular tool. And most tools, like QA Touch, even Jira, if you look for plugins, all you have to do is search for BDD, and you'll see that there's all kinds of ways to get the idea out there. And then I just don't want to get fixated on the tool more so than the idea of, you know, you're getting out of your silo, right? And you're hitting these other departments, and you're gaining a lot of the traction, you're developing the trust. So yeah, could you provide some comments in terms of BDD and requirements? A lot of times there's lack of requirements. Well, yeah, well, precisely. That engagement that I showed you with, for example, the impact map as an example. There's another slide I have. It's got all about, you know, business goals have to be asserted by the C-suite, right? So this is happening at the C level. They're digital marketers and sales. They're helping figure out the impacts and the deliverables. This is where, you know, there's a sort of a combination of the front office and the back office, right? And so right here, there's a lot of exchange of knowledge, which requires you to shift left, right? You got to get up, get out, and get yourself involved and identify when meetings are happening, when new roadmap ideations are happening, and try to get involved, right? Try to get involved so that it's not the ball has been kicked down, right? To you at some point. You want to get involved as early as possible. The meeting schedules are all there. You just have to show the initiative and show up to those meetings or get invited, right? And I'm sure they're not going to have problems getting that the invites out. So get yourself invited to important meetings relating to roadmap, get invited to triage meetings, be able to shift right and understand what the customer pain points are, shift left to understand what are the enhancements that are coming down the road, make sure that you're writing acceptance criteria, right, using BDD and running those across throughout the different domains out there. And what you'll see is you'll be talking to a lot of folks, right? And so you're not just sitting on at your seat. So it's slightly different than being an automation specialist where you are sitting in your seat. But for the rest, there is a path. If you don't want to dive down and become a test automation specialist only, which they too can go from being a test automation specialist to, say, somebody who is able to do how should I say it? Get into DevOps as an example, or pivot into development. So there's always that path. If you go down in the silo, you can pivot into more technical arenas. But for those of us who want to get more into the management side, or pivot away from testing into something else, or just become a jack of all trades and then eventually master of all trades, that's how you do that. I hope that helped answer that question.
Okay. I believe we have a question from Catherine. Throw more light on the advantages of BDD over TDD.
So TDD was essentially designed for developers, right? And they're writing unit tests, they're writing automated unit tests, and they're just gaining confidence for themselves, right? And that was the birthplace of the test-driven development. That's why I said I wasn't a big fan of BDD being called behavioral driven development, because as testers, we're borrowing a lot of these ideas, but we're not really looking at it from a development perspective so much as we're looking at it from a tester's perspective, right? So what TDD does is works on the inside, or what a developer thinks he wants to get tested and what he thinks he wants to gain ground on, but he's not necessarily, or she is not necessarily thinking about the business goals. They're not thinking about traceability back to business goals, right? They're not also necessarily thinking of the voice of the customer. So BDD is uniquely an outside in approach where they're trying to, where the notion is we're never losing sight or the voice of the customer, right? Throughout the entire process of BDD, especially with the Gherkin DSL, we're making sure there's all validations happening, and it can absolutely trace back to the original UX or BA goals, right? Of what the impacts were from that particular slide that I showed, where they wanted an impact, right? Well, how is it that what our deliverables are trace back to the impacts, which trace back to the business goals. TDD doesn't let you do that. TDD is really just for the assurance of the software developer wanting to make sure that their automated tests validate the sanity of their build. And these days, TDD is pretty much automated tests for developers, right? So BDD is beyond automated tests. It's also an idea of getting out of your silo and becoming the glue from between the front office and the back office. I hope that helps answer that question. Get your eureka moment, guys. You need your eureka moment. You know, how are you going to integrate these ideas, especially with the quarantine and lockdown? You have time to think about this. You know, how can you improve your career portfolio, your tester's portfolio? What can you do that's different than what you have already been doing? And what can you do that is a glue that can help you interact with more folks and make sure that, you know, you're able to extend what it is that you practice as a tester and bring that sense of assurance, right? How do you pass that assurance around in the organization? That's the key. So with that said, thank you, Bhavni, Shrija. Jason's coming up, yes, right now, but thank you very much to all you guys. If there's no other questions, I'm ready to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Faisal, for your insightful session. It's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And here is our second speaker, Mr. Jason Myers, Udemy Course Author at GlitchIT Systems. He has around 14 plus years of experience in building best practices of testing. Welcome, Jason, to share your thoughts on planning for web test automation.
So I don't have the fancy setup like Faisal does. I'm doing the work from home edition, so you can see my flower couch there in the window. Looks like the sun is starting to shine this morning. As was mentioned, let me move this out of the way. So I'm going to be talking about planning for automated testing today. So a little bit about me, as mentioned, lots of years of experience doing QA. I work in healthcare a lot. Right now I'm working on Zoom+Care, Udemy, YouTube, blog, all that kind of stuff, just kind of share knowledge with people in the QA industry. All right, so got a lot to cover, so let's get going here. All right, so you're talking about doing some automation testing. So your team wants it, your manager wants it, and you want it, right? You want to advance your career, you want to get that new job, because basically every job out there that is being posted is going to say some sort of automation on it. It's going to say you need to know how to automate front-end web, you need to automate some apps, you need to automate some back-end APIs. So what are the goals that you need to accomplish when you're trying to do some automation? So number one thing, reduce manual testing. So those include things like regression, browser support, and browser size support. So why do you want to automate regression, browser support, browser size support? It's about time and money, right? So most of us probably are working in Agile or some form of Agile. So that means you have very short cycles of having to test, develop and test things. And you're not just testing the feature that is being deployed, you're testing all the features that were deployed before also, because you need to make sure you didn't break anything. So if you have 10 cases, sure, you can do it manually. But if you have 100 cases, it's getting a little trickier. You get 1,000, then you're having yourself a problem. If you only have like one QA engineer, they have to run 1,000 test cases and plus do the additional feature work. So that 1,000 is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger each sprint. So that is the main thing there for why. And as I mentioned before, since this is Agile, you want to release faster. So if you can get that testing done faster, you can release faster. And that's kind of like the point of Agile, right? It's like continuously releasing, continuously being faster, and always testing. And continuing with that continuous word, we're going to talk about continuous testing and feedback, right? So if you're always testing as things are coming in, so this is not waterfall anymore. We're not waiting to the end and testing everything within like a month or 2 months or however long your QA cycle is. We're testing things as they come in. So you'll have a small little feature that comes in. You'll come in and test it real fast, but you're going to run all your automated regression tests also. So you have to be able to do this really quickly. And like I said, that 1,000 number, if you have to do that 1,000 tests manually by hand every single time somebody checks in a feature, you're going to want to quit your job or find something else to do. That's not QA, because that's not fun and that's not sustainable. All right. So what are things that should not be goals for that you want to solve with automated testing? So automated testing can solve the things that I mentioned before, but you don't want to go too crazy with it. So it's not going to find 100% of the bugs. So your tests are only as good as how you write them, right? So whether it's manual or automated, there's no way to find 100% of the bugs 100% of the time, unless you're super intuitive and you can kind of plan and guess of every single possibility of what might happen in the system and write an automated test for that. Then sure, you can get 100% of the bugs, maybe, but that if you've been QA for even more than a year, or even for like the new guys, you'll know that finding 100% of the bugs 100% of the time is not a reality. All right, and the other thing I want to say is automating 100% of all tests. So yes, it's possible to automate 100% of tests if your application is maybe small enough to do it, and it's written in a way that's highly automatable, and you don't have to a whole bunch of dependencies that might interrupt that course. But for most teams that have these more complex systems where they're interacting with a lot of different things and going in and out of the app and whatever, there's some reason or other that you might not be able to automate 100% of the tests. So I'm not going to say don't try, but you should try, because you'll be surprised and you'll probably learn something along the way of how to do some automation of something that you didn't know how to do before. But just don't go with that out the get-go, because sometimes management, upper leaders think that we can find all the bugs with automation and automate all of the tests. And that's possible, but it's going to take a lot of time, and it's probably not very feasible. All right. So what are the things that are required in automated testing? So you've decided you want to do automated testing. I'm going to say that word automated a lot, so I apologize about that. So first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to write test scripts. So that means you're going to have to understand requirements, write the test scripts, validate the test scripts work, and update as needed. So for most people, this is going to look like development work. So you're going to be writing code, and you're going to be testing your code. So that all takes time, because you have to write the code, you have to make it work, and repeat over and over again until it does exactly what you want it to do. Next thing, review the results. So once your tests are in place and ready to go for your development branch, your production branch, whatever, you have to review on a constant basis of what's going on. So if everything is green, everything passes, then you're probably not doing much reviewing, because you're going to go under the assumption that your test was written accurately because you did it in the previous step, and that you have a good working test. So, but that is not the case, because your tests are going to fail, and they're going to fail a lot, especially since we're working on web apps, and little minor things can break the test. So functionality may not change, but things like design and UI placement of elements can cause that. So reviewing means that you're figuring out what the failure was, fixing the broken test, and opening bugs on broken features. So basically doing this review stage is oftentimes going to put you back into this first stage here, where you're writing tests, you're fixing them. Sometimes it takes longer to fix the test than to write it in the first place, because you have to kind of step through it and figure out why it's not doing what it was doing before. All right. So going along with that, maintaining the test scripts and the framework. So pretty much what I said before. All right. So let's talk about what are you going to automate. So I'm pretty sure if you've been in QA, you know what this is. So this is the testing pyramid. So there's typically in web app testing, there are kind of 3 tiers, right? So unit testing, this is the lower level code testing that typically the developers will do. Sometimes QA might do it, but this is usually, if you write the code, you're writing unit tests to make sure that your functions are working as expected. And this should be bare minimum of what goes into any automation. Second tier here is services. That's going to be the backend APIs. And then the top tier here is the UI, so the front end. So the doing things the way the user might do it from the front end. All right. So you'll notice that the chunks are different sizes. So unit testing should be the majority of the number of tests. So this should have the most tests. Services will have the next amount of tests, and then UI should have less. The reason is that as you go up the pyramid, the tests get slower. So the units run super fast. The services still run pretty fast, but not as fast as the unit. And the UI is super slow. And it's also not very, it's very prone to error because, as I said, you have a lot of moving pieces. Because like if a service changed, then you have to change you might have to change the front end test. If an element changes, you might have to change the front end test. And a lot of the maintenance is going to happen up in this upper area. So this is the most expensive and kind of least bang for your buck, but still very critical for your testing. All right, so all of that, who's going to create the automated tests? So there's kind of three options here, right? So you can have the test engineer. So the benefits of a test engineer doing is they understand the testing aspect. So they're a professional, like as Faisal said, you are a specialist at doing automated testing. You know how to do this, or you're a special at testing rather, not automated testing maybe, but you know how to test stuff. You know how the types of things that you are going to put into a form that's going to try to make it fail or pass. So you're a specialist. So you may not be proficient in coding or DevOps is the kind of downside though, right? So if you've been in QA for probably over 10 years or more, times have changed. We used to be able to get by with just doing manual black box testing, but that's no longer the case. You need to know how to code and do some sort of DevOps. And if you've never done it before, then that means you need to go and start learning it either from somebody else or go learn it on your own using books or online resources. So there's kind of a pros and cons, right? So next one is developer. So they understand coding, right? But they may not be proficient in DevOps, sure. They might not be proficient in testing. So this not proficient in testing is kind of like the key one, because I think if developers were QA in a previous life, then they would write their code, they would understand testing a little bit more. A lot of the developers do an awesome job of writing unit tests and thinking about different scenarios and all that stuff, but some of them don't have the intuition of what a QA has for when we run tests. So it's kind of like a different mindset. All right. Third option here is automation engineer. So I'm going to call this our SDETs, or software development engineering test. So this is still a QA, but this is kind of like hybrid, right? So this is that, I guess the farther right on Faisal's chart is the mix of the manual tester or the QA with all the knowledge and practices of like, these are the best practices, tools, and whatever of how to do QA in general. And then he has the knowledge of how to do coding. So he's kind of like a split of the two, but he understands, and this is kind of his specialty of being able to do QA and development. So they understand coding and testing aspects, but may be proficient in DevOps. DevOps is going to be pretty important because you're going to be running your test in automated pipelines, because if you have to push the button to start the test every single time, then it's not totally automated. So that DevOps thing is going to become pretty key going on. All right, so really, who's going to create the automated test? So you say you're going to do it. If you're in a team that has been going on for 5-10 years and you've never had automated testing, and you've been saying you want to do it for years and years and years, but who's really going to do it? So why do we have that question? Because there's always priorities, because automated testing takes time. Remember, this is like development work. So development work takes quite a bit of time. QA takes quite a bit of time. And if your priorities are just to get things out the door, you may not have time to properly invest in some QA automation. Because I know some teams are super stacked with work that they don't have time to even like go and get a cup of coffee sometimes because they're they're doing like 10-12 hour days. Sometimes they're just like trying to get stuff out the door and fixing production bugs and all this sorts of things. So obviously those things often take priority. So if your team is not making room for uh, writing automated tests, then it's probably not going to happen, because people don't want to work 10-hour days and then spend another 5 hours each week or each day to write automated tests. So time goes in with that. And then the other thing is experience. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of people out there that are kind of more old school, 5, 10, 15 years experience, that are kind of still used to the manual testing, depending on where you worked. And that's just fine. But if you want to get into this automation stuff, you need to kind of do it. You can't just do it sometimes, because as we all know, the more you do something, the better you're going to get at it. All right, so this is not a part-time job. This is a full-time position. All right, so keys to successful implementation of test automation. So figure out what your goals are, ensure the correct people are assigned, build test automation into your process. So your team needs to build some buffering so that you can do it, right? So they can't give you the finished product 5 minutes before it's supposed to be done, or the end of the sprint, and expect you to test it and automate it and do all that stuff. It needs to be added to the process, right? So everybody understands. And as always, don't treat it as a part-time side project, because it's never going to work that way. All right, so switching gears a little bit. So choosing the correct tool for test automation. So I'm mostly talking about web front end stuff. So how do you decide what tools to use? So you need to figure out what you want to test: code versus no code, programming language, open source versus paid, reporting, and integration support. So obviously, you need what to test means, like, is it a desktop app? Is it a mobile app? Is it a web app? Is it API? So those are the what to test. Code versus no code. So most open source tools are going to be code based. So you need to know some sort of codes, probably either JavaScript, Python, whatever. There's an automation framework for every single type of code out there. So if you're going the code route, then there's that. And then if you go the no code route, then it's going to kind of go into this other thing where paid versus unpaid. So no code is often paid. It's often very expensive and it's less robust. But if that's the option that you have to go with, because you don't have time to train engineers to code and do automation and all that stuff, you can go with the no code route and kind of get them up to speed and all that stuff. So I already talked about programming language reporting. So how do you want your tests to look? And then integration support. What things do you want to plug in, right? So let's take a look here. So some examples of web UI testing tools. There's a lot out there. So obviously you're going to hear the word Selenium when you're ever talking about web application tools for testing, so frameworks, right? So Selenium is typically the backbone of most web application testing. So if you're using Selenium directly, or if you're using one of the other many frameworks out there, it's probably still using Selenium's WebDriver to do a lot of the work. Some places have built their own implementation of Selenium, like not Protractor, WebDriver.io has their own version of WebDriver that they're using. I think Puppeteer is not using Selenium, maybe Cypress and Puppeteer. I can't remember off the top of my head, but Selenium is not just like the only thing you can use. You can use any framework out there, and they're typically using Selenium in the background. All right. So API testing tools, here's some just to kind of go over it. So I know I'm talking about web application testing, but the web application is going to hit an API. So you're going to want to test that also. Bunch of examples here. So there's a mix of free and paid versions here. All right, so reporting tools. So the reason reporting is important, because unless your upper management doesn't want to see what the results of testing is, then you can kind of go with just like the command line stuff. But usually management wants to know, it's like, what tests are failing today, what is the trends and all this stuff of things that have failed now versus in the past and how to make things better. So usually you're going to have to invest in some sort of invest some time at least in some sort of reporting tool. So here's Allure, so you can see that it's prettier. This is more like a manager kind of view of overall of what testing is, because managers don't want to see this. They don't care about the code version of it, right? All right, so looks like I'm getting long here. I'm going to go through this real quick. So strategy for automated testing. So what are the key design aspects for writing automated tests? So all these things: understand behavior, independent, focus your testing, plan for scalability, isolate test data usability, follow good coding standards, code review, source control. All right, so let's go through here. So you can use behavior-driven testing as Faisal said, that you can kind of plug this into most modern frameworks out there. If you wanted to have the BDD syntax, and basically advantage of that is that you can, if you're using BDD in your user stories and you put them in your manual test cases, and then you can basically just copy that into your automated tests and then write all the code that goes behind it in the back, in the framework, and you can have BDD in there. So as I said, most frameworks support that. All right, tests should be independent. You should not be dependent on other tests. This is a huge mistake a lot of people make. So say you have two tests. The first test is doing some setup, and then the second test is relying on that first test to have done what it was supposed to do. So that's not a good thing, obviously, because we want our test to be independent. If the first test fails, and then the second test is obviously going to fail, right? So I would rather have a single test fail for a specific reason than have two tests fail because the first test didn't do what it was supposed to do, and it's just kind of good coding practices. All right, so let's go to this real quick. All right, so as I said before, focus your test cases. Don't try to test everything in one test case. Don't like bring your rake with you and just drag along everything along the way and test every little thing along the way to your endpoint. Figure out what your goal is. If your goal is to make sure that the shopping cart button adds something to a shopping cart, that's what you're testing. That's where your focus should be on. I know you have to get logged into the system. You have to find the item. You have to do all the stuff before you actually get to that part, but your test needs to be focused on the actual thing that you're testing, because otherwise you're going to get failures all over the place because something simple like somebody spelled something wrong, and then on the first step of your test, and then if you're checking for that every single time, then all of your tests are going to fail after that, and it's kind of unclear why your test failed. Well, it's obvious because something was spelled wrong, but it's not for the right reason, because your test is going to say add to shopping cart failed, but it wasn't actually add to shopping cart failed. It's because somebody spelled something wrong. All right, plan for scalability. You need to make sure that you can add more tests. You can do things like browser support. You can run things in parallel. All these things are important. All right, so isolate that test data. So use the data for each test. So reusability, this is if you're a developer, if you've done any development, this is dry principle. Do not repeat yourself. So write functions that you can reuse, repeat, and make it good. So you don't want to write the same block of code in 20 different tests. Make a function for it if you're doing that so that you can reuse it. All right, follow good coding convention. So as I said, dry principle, consistent indentations, all these sorts of things. These are things that developers do. These are things that should be in your code review checklist. And see, good coding convention. So test pass and run, test expectations, match requirements, and good coding convention. So code review is super important. So that's another thing that you need to build into your process. So not just writing the test, not just executing the test, not just maintaining it, but also having somebody code review it and fixing stuff. So this all takes time. This all takes investment of people to do stuff. All right. Oop. And then last thing, source control here. So make sure you have source control. Don't just put this on your local computer and run it from there. You need to have it in source control. You need to have some sort of DevOps pulling it from the source control and running it. Just all sorts of things like that. Okay. So here's just stuff. All of my information is on my website. So if you just go to GlitchIT System and you ever want to find out more about me or stuff that I offer for classes and information, go ahead and hit that up. But that's the end of the presentation there.
Yeah, we do have one question from Kannadasan. Hey Jason, it's great session and thanks for that. Is it good to integrate both UI and API testing?
Absolutely. So I'm a believer in full stack QA. So there's, full stack developer means that they can work on the front end UI and they can work on the back end APIs. That's pretty much full stack, right? So QAs, I expect you to be able to be a full stack QA also. So you need to be able to test the front end and you need to be able to test the APIs. So I always integrate both UI and API testing. So as I said before, with the testing period, you want to get that API testing in because you can do that. You can spin that up super fast because it's a lot easier and faster to write those API tests and run them. So that's a good point. Because remember, when you're on the web app, and a lot of times when you're hitting the submit button or search button or a lot of things, you're making those API requests, and you don't actually have to test those things on the web app itself because you can test it without it. So you can build out your API tests to run before. So usually I have my API tests run before my UI tests because if my API tests are all failing, then obviously my UI tests are going to fail because so there's kind of no reason to run the UI tests at that point, if you kind of understand. So absolutely do both. API first is usually what I say because that's the most bang for your buck. And then after that, do the UI because this is going to be the more user-facing, user scenario, user workflows of how you're going to do your testing.
So, and he have another question as well, Jason, like how design patterns are important while developing a framework?
Let's see. I don't know. I think for me, figuring out I think scalability and kind of reusability has been like how I've been designing my last framework. So I'll take the framework and I'll add things like, because I know like key things, right? So I have multiple environments that I need to test in. So I need to be able to set up configurations so that I can run any test against any environment at any time. So that's kind of first thing there. And then also with data, right? So data, your data that you're using might be different in dev versus QA and all these things. So kind of making sure that you have the right configurations for what you need to test. So I'll kind of explain like automated testing for like front end. So there's kind of like three things. So there's the test cases that is kind of where you write the user, kind of like the user facing of what it's going to be. So if we're using like BDD as an example, it's like, given I do something, when something happens, then this is the result. So that's kind of like one part of it. The other part is the kind of back end or the more coding part of it, saying that click on this button, search for this thing, do this thing specifically via code. So those are two separate files. And then the third file is going to be the configuration. So the configuration is going to tell you when I execute my launch my tests, it needs to run against this version of the URL, this version of the data, and stuff like that. So you kind of need to plan accordingly for what you need to, what you're going to need to test, not just today, but going forward in the future.
That's great, Jason. Like we have another question from a participant, Karishma. Is keyword-driven testing approach preferred?
It's kind of up to you what you use. So I have used like BDD for a little bit. A lot of my tests are written more in kind of like what the syntax is called. It's but the tests are like a Mocha Chai kind of format where it's this test should do something. So it's more kind of code based in how it looks, but it's kind of totally up to your team how you want to write your tests. I don't think there's anything preferred. It's totally like what your team wants to do, how your team wants to do it. And when I say team, I mean like the developers, the QA, and like if the project managers, if the managers are looking at your test results, and then you kind of go with what makes sense.
Okay, that's awesome. Like perfect, Jason. Like another question, like can we automate a bug to make sure it is not occurring again?
Yeah, absolutely. So as long as the whatever you're trying to automate is automatable, you can definitely do that. So that's typically part of the process that we do. If we have a bug that shows up that we did not find before using our current suite of automated tests, then we add that as part of a new test. So anytime there's new bugs, then we'll add a test in to make sure that way it doesn't happen again. And also I often like to hand off my automation to the developers. So I say, here's the code. Once you finish doing your development, you can just run the specific test here to make sure that it passes what it needs to do, because this is automated testing. They don't need to manually do something, and I don't really need to manually retest it for them. They can just get my automated code and push the button, and they can test it themselves, because there's no point in doing this back and forth of like, oh, here, try this to see if it's fixed. They can just do that themselves, because it's fast and it's simple, and it usually only takes like a few seconds to run the automated test than it does to mark the bug as complete, send it over to QA, and then have us test it, and then we have to go back to them and explain why it didn't work or whatever happened in the end.
Perfect. So we have another question, like what factors needs to be considered when choosing a framework for automation? Is it website dependent?
Yeah, so this one is, so I think I had a slide on that. I probably went super fast on it. So this one is kind of a couple things. So here are kind of like the factors, right? So what needs to be tested. So it's going to be if it's a web app, then you're going to need something that does web apps. You're going to have to choose code versus no code. So if you're going the code route, then you're going to need to figure out if you already know a specific language and you're the only QA on it, then I think you have probably free reign of choosing which language to use for your framework. Other than that, you're going to have to get with the other QAs and figure out like which language do we want to use. Like if 2 out of 3 of you know Python, then it would probably be a good idea to go with Python and then have the third person catch up and stuff like that. Other thing is like I'm going to assume that you're going to go with code base. So it's going to be usually open source. So it's free. Stuff like that. It's not website dependent, but if you are wanting to do like browser support, some automated frameworks do better with that than others. I think Cypress and Puppeteer only do Chrome, like a version of Chrome and a version of Firefox. But if you're wanting to do like Safari and IE, then you're probably going to want to go with one of the other frameworks out there.
Okay, perfect. Here you go for the next question. Is there any possibilities of building a common automation test case to test all the differently behaving website in the same domain?
Yes. So I think you're talking about different like I think they're talking about the different like URL endpoints, right? So like you have a QA version of the site, you have a dev version of the site, and you have production version of the site. So that's totally possible. You're going to just use that config file, and you're going to have to build out your tests so that instead of writing the URL of the specific environment in the test, it's going to come from your config file, and that config file will drive which URL endpoint is going to be used for the tests.
And next question. Hi, Jason. That was a great session. I have one question. Is the Postman right tool for API testing?
So Postman is a great tool. We use it a lot for API testing. I kind of treat it as more of like a manual API testing tool. So you can write test scripts in there. So once you build out all your test scenarios, you can just push the button and then you can add assertions to it. So the assertions are the expectations of what should happen in the response or the headers or whatever. So you can use that, but if you want to get more scaled up and do more complicated things, Postman test is not super great for doing those sort of things. So you probably want something designed specifically for running automated tests, kind of like in batch and stuff like that. But Postman is like, I think Postman or Insomnia, they're similar products. They're a very great tool to kind of like start up with testing APIs or even like doing some like small automation of APIs.
Here you go for the next question. Which is the best tool to test application which has a lot of data visualization charts?
I am not sure. So I don't know what would be a best tool, but I would assume that typically most of the frameworks would be able to handle that. That's something I haven't automated before, so I don't have any personal feedback of doing that specifically. So you might want to. That would be probably something you would have to like hit like the forums or just like look up in the documentation of the frameworks to see which would best work for that.
Okay, perfect. Can we automate two differently behaving websites like Amazon and Flipkart with a single code?
I don't know what single code means, but let's see. So you can automate. So if you want to have like one project where you're automating multiple apps, you can do that. So I do that in my current job. So they can be thought of, they're actually different websites. So there's probably like 3 or 4 different websites that we have to jump back and forth with to do automation with. So I think that's kind of what you're asking. So we absolutely do that. So we have a test that might set up some data on one website, and then it jumps over to the other website within the same test, and then it does whatever it needs to do on the second website. And then if that's the end of the test, then that's good. And if needed, it can jump back over to the other test or the other website to do the rest of the testing. So for example of that, we have a chat application. So there's two websites. There's a website where the customer service team uses for the chat, and then there's the actual production homepage where the user would use it. So we have tests that are quickly going back and forth to make sure that the message was sent, and then the message was received, and then send a new message, and then the message was received. So we're kind of doing that back and forth across two different websites simultaneously.
Perfect, Jason. I mean, the question Q&A session is over, and thank you so much for your insightful session. So before ending this session, I believe like this is my responsibility to have a sneak preview of the speakers for our second Quality in Touch virtual series. So let me share my screen. Let's see like who is there for our next session. So our next session is happening on June 8, 2020 on Monday, 8:30 a.m. EST and 6 p.m. IST. So we have lined up like two amazing speakers for the event. One is Prashant Hedge. He'll be speaking on heuristics and mnemonics and software testing. And he currently heads the QA team at MO Engage. Prashant is an agile enthusiast and has worked in different roles on agile teams for the last 5 years. And Prashant has helped thousands of ISTQB aspirants to clear the certification with his free app. That's really amazing. And the next speaker for the upcoming session is Thomas Gagley. He'll be handling on how to set smart goals for testers, and he is a known feminine in the social media, and he's called as Tom Gagley, and he's an agile development specialist and consultant and a host of the software process and management podcast. So guys, like we will get back to you with the recorded session and the with the registration link for our upcoming session. And also I would like to grab this opportunity to give an brief about our DC Cap and what we stand for as a community. And so we are contributing to the whole e-commerce and the ITers fraternity. And as such, we are a digital commerce agency specializing in building e-commerce storefronts for clients abroad. We specialize in Magento, Shopify, and BigCommerce. And also we have around like 15 years of experience in the industry, and we have developed a handful of products that allows brands and businesses to unleash their full potential. And jumping on to our product suite, and apart from QA Touch, we do have three amazing products. One is Productimize, a product customization platform. Clores, an automated integration tool between ERP, CRM, and e-commerce stores. And FlexiPIM, a product information management platform tool. So that said, looking forward to hosting another insightful session for you all. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for joining us for this day. Hope you had a great session. Thank you.